Sophie Nolan had been crying in her car for 20 minutes when she finally grabbed her phone and pressed record on the voice note. Her best friend Mara was the person she always called when things fell apart, and today definitely qualified. Sophie's voice cracked as she started talking, her words tumbling out in a messy stream of consciousness about how her grandmother had just been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, how scared she was, how she felt so alone trying to handle everything. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, and her grandmother was all she had left. The woman who raised her, who taught her to bake bread on Sunday mornings, who still called her every night to say goodnight even though Sophie was 24 years old now. "I just don't know what to do, Mara," Sophie said through tears, her voice breaking. "The doctor said we caught it early, but I'm terrified. What if she forgets me? What if one day she looks at me and doesn't know who I am? I can't lose her. I can't lose another person I love. I'm so tired of being strong and pretending everything is okay when it's not. I just want someone to tell me it's going to be all right, even if it's a lie." She ended the recording and hit send without checking the number properly. Her vision was blurred with tears, and she just needed to get the words out to someone who would understand. Her phone rang 30 seconds later. Sophie frowned at the unknown number on her screen. That was weird. Mara always texted back first. She almost declined the call, but something made her answer. "Hello. I know this is going to sound strange," a deep male voice said, "but I think you just sent that voice note to the wrong number." Sophie's heart dropped into her stomach. "Oh my God." "I'm Xander Pierce," he continued, his voice surprisingly gentle. "And I just want you to know that it's going to be all right. I don't know if that helps coming from a stranger, but I needed you to hear it anyway. What you're going through sounds incredibly hard, and you shouldn't have to face it alone." Sophie sat frozen in her car, her mind racing. She had just poured her heart out to a complete stranger. The humiliation should have been overwhelming, but instead, she felt something else. His voice was warm, genuine, like he actually cared. "I'm so sorry," she managed to say. "I thought I was sending that to my friend. I'm mortified." "Don't be," Xander said quickly. "These things happen, but I heard something in your voice, something real, and I couldn't just ignore it." "Are you okay? That's a stupid question. Obviously you're not okay, but are you safe? You need anything?" Sophie laughed despite herself, a watery sound. "I'm safe. I'm just sitting in my car outside my apartment feeling sorry for myself." "That's allowed," Xander said. "You're dealing with something really difficult. My grandfather had Alzheimer's. I know how scary it is, especially at the beginning when you're trying to wrap your head around what's coming." Something in Sophie's chest loosened slightly. "Really? Really? And I know it probably doesn't mean much coming from someone you don't know, but I want you to know that you're stronger than you think. The fact that you're this scared means you love her deeply, and that love matters. It matters more than you know." Sophie found herself wiping away fresh tears, but these felt different somehow. Less desperate, more cathartic. "Thank you. I don't even know you, but thank you for calling. You didn't have to do that." "I know," Xander said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "But something told me I should. Listen, I know this is completely insane, but would you want to grab coffee sometime? I promise I'm not some creep who makes a habit of calling wrong numbers. I just feel like maybe we were supposed to talk today." Sophie should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was how horror movies started. But there was something about his voice, about the genuine kindness in it, that made her want to say yes. "That's completely insane," she said slowly. "I know. I don't even know you. We can fix that." "This could be a terrible idea." "It could be," Xander agreed. "Or it could be the start of something good. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for." Sophie took a deep breath. "Okay. Yeah. Yeah, coffee sounds nice. When are you free tomorrow? There's a place called Riverside Cafe downtown. It's public, lots of people around, so you'll feel safe. Noon. Sophie surprised herself by laughing. You're really trying to sell this, aren't you? I'm trying to make sure you actually show up and don't think I'm planning to murder you, Xander said, his tone teasing but still somehow earnest. So yes, I'm absolutely trying to sell this. Riverside Cafe at noon, Sophie confirmed. How will I know it's you? I'll be the guy who looks like he's slightly terrified he might get stood up, Xander said. I'll wear a blue jacket. What about you? I have red hair. I'll probably be the one who looks equally terrified. Perfect, Xander said, and his voice softened again. And Sophie. That is your name, right? I heard you say it in the voice note. Yes, that's my name. Get some rest tonight, okay, and call your actual friend. She'd probably want to know what you're going through. Sophie smiled despite everything. I will. Thank you, Xander. See you tomorrow, Sophie. After they hung up, Sophie sat in her car for another 10 minutes, replaying the conversation in her head. She had just agreed to meet a complete stranger for coffee because she had accidentally sent him her most vulnerable moment. It was insane. It was reckless. It was also the first time in hours that she didn't feel completely alone. She finally went inside and called Mara, who was predictably both concerned and fascinated by the entire situation. You're actually going to meet him? Mara asked, her voice rising an octave. Soph, this is how every true crime documentary starts. I know, Sophie said, collapsing onto her couch. But Mara, there was something about his voice. He sounded so genuine, and he told me about his grandfather having Alzheimer's. Why would he make that up? I don't know, maybe because he's a serial killer with a very specific method, Mara said, but Sophie could hear the smile in her voice. Okay, fine. But I'm dropping a pin on your location, and if you don't text me every 15 minutes, I'm calling the police. Deal, Sophie agreed. She paused. Is it crazy that I'm actually looking forward to it? Yes, Mara said immediately. But also kind of romantic in a completely unhinged way. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise. The next morning, Sophie changed her outfit 4 times before settling on jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her red hair stand out. She told herself she wasn't trying that hard, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Riverside Cafe was bustling when she arrived, which helped calm her nerves slightly. She spotted him immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, wearing the promised blue jacket, and when he looked up and met her eyes, Sophie felt her breath catch. Xander Pierce was not what she expected. He was tall, probably around 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly messy in a way that looked intentional. He had strong features, a jaw that could cut glass and eyes that were a striking gray-blue. But what struck her most was his expression when he saw her. Relief and genuine happiness, and something else she couldn't quite name. He stood up as she approached, and Sophie noticed he moved with a kind of controlled confidence that suggested someone used to being in charge. Sophie, he asked, even though he clearly knew it was her. That's me, she said, suddenly feeling shy. You're Xander. Guilty, he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. I'm really glad you came. I was about 60% sure you were going to ghost me. It was more like 70-30, Sophie admitted, and he laughed. They sat down, and for a moment there was awkward silence. Then they both started talking at the same time. So I should probably explain. I wanted to say they stopped, laughed, and Xander gestured for her to go first. I wanted to say thank you again for calling yesterday, Sophie said. You didn't have to do that, and it meant a lot, more than you probably know. I'm glad I did, Xander said simply. And I should probably explain that I'm not in the habit of pursuing wrong number situations. This is actually a first for me. Same here, Sophie said. I don't usually spill my emotional guts to strangers and then agree to meet them for coffee. Well, I feel special then, Xander said with a grin. So tell me about yourself, Sophie. What do you do when you're not accidentally sending voice notes to random billionaires? Sophie had been taking a sip of the coffee she'd ordered and she nearly choked. I'm sorry, what? Xander looked confused for a moment, then his expression cleared. Oh, that just came out. I wasn't trying to lead with that, I swear. You're actually a billionaire. Sophie asked, her voice rising slightly. Several people at nearby tables glanced over. Technically, yes, Xander said, looking uncomfortable for the first time. I run Pierce Industries. We do commercial real estate development mostly on the West Coast. But that's not why I called you back yesterday. I called because I heard someone in pain and I wanted to help. The money thing is just circumstances of birth and a lot of very smart people working for me. Sophie sat back in her chair, trying to process this information. Pierce Industries. As in the Pierce Industries that just developed that massive waterfront project downtown. That would be the one, Xander admitted. Look, I know this changes things. People get weird when they find out about the money. But I'm just a guy who heard your voice note and couldn't stop thinking about whether you were okay. That's the truth. Sophie studied his face, looking for signs of ego or arrogance, but all she saw was genuine concern that she was going to run away. It was strangely endearing. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. But I am definitely going to need a minute to wrap my head around this. I accidentally trauma dumped on a billionaire. Xander's expression relaxed into a smile. You trauma dumped on a person who happened to care. The billionaire thing is just trivia. I don't think that's how billionaires work, Sophie said, but she was smiling too. Then I'm a terrible billionaire, Xander said. Now stop deflecting and tell me about you. What do you do? Sophie felt herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. I'm a veterinary nurse at an animal clinic in Riverside. It's not glamorous, but I love it. There's something really grounding about spending your day taking care of animals. They don't care about your problems or your past. They just want you to make them feel better. That sounds incredible, Xander said, and he seemed to mean it. I can't even keep a houseplant alive. The idea of being responsible for an actual living creature is terrifying. You run a billion-dollar company, but you can't water a plant, Sophie asked, teasing him. I have people who water my plants, Xander said seriously. 3 different people, actually, because I kept killing them and my assistant staged an intervention. Sophie laughed, a real laugh that felt good after the heavy weight of the past 24 hours. That might be the most billionaire thing you've said so far. I'm full of surprises, Xander said. His expression sobered slightly. How are you doing today? With everything you talked about yesterday, Sophie appreciated that he asked directly instead of dancing around it. I'm okay. Better than yesterday. I called my grandmother this morning and she sounded good. Happy. I think I was catastrophizing a bit, imagining the worst-case scenario right away. The doctor said it's early stages and there are treatments that can help slow the progression. I just need to take it one day at a time. That's a good approach, Xander said. And for what it's worth, you're allowed to catastrophize sometimes. You're dealing with something scary. Give yourself permission to feel whatever you need to feel. Are you always this emotionally intelligent, or are you just trying to impress me? Sophie asked. Can it be both? Xander said with a grin. But honestly, I've spent a lot of time in therapy. When you grow up with money, people have a lot of expectations about who you're supposed to be. It took me a while to figure out who I actually was underneath all that. Sophie felt herself warming to him even more. There was a vulnerability in his admission that felt real, not like he was trying to gain sympathy points. They talked for 2 hours. The coffee went cold and they ordered more. Sophie told him about growing up with her grandmother after her parents died, about how the woman had dropped everything to raise her when she was only 10 years old. Xander told her about the pressure of inheriting his father's company at 28 when his father had a heart attack and had to step down. He talked about learning to trust himself, about the fear of making a decision that could cost people their jobs. "I don't think people understand that part," Xander said, staring down at his cup. "Everyone sees the money and the power, but they don't see the responsibility. Every decision I make affects thousands of people, their livelihoods, their families. It keeps me up at night sometimes." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Sophie said softly. Xander looked up at her, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition. "It is sometimes," he admitted. "That's why yesterday, when I heard your voice, it felt like something real in a world that often feels very fake." "Does that make sense?" "It does," Sophie said. "More than you know." When they finally left the cafe, the afternoon sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. Xander walked her to her car, his hands in his pockets. "I'd like to see you again," he said, "if you're interested. And I promise to be upfront about everything from now on. No more surprise billionaire revelations." Sophie laughed. "I'd like that too. Though I have to admit, the billionaire thing is still surreal. I keep expecting someone to jump out and tell me I'm on a prank show." "If it helps, I feel the same way about this entire situation," Xander said. "I never expected a wrong number voice note to lead to the best conversation I've had in months. Years, maybe." Sophie felt her cheeks warm. "Smooth talker." "Honest talker," Xander corrected. He pulled out his phone. "Can I get your actual number this time? Through conventional means." She gave it to him, and he called it immediately so she'd have his. "There. Now you can screen my calls if you want." "I'll think about it," Sophie said, but she was smiling. Xander smiled back, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he leaned in and kissed her cheek, so quickly and gently that Sophie almost wondered if she imagined it. "Talk soon, Sophie," he said, and walked away before she could respond. Sophie drove home in a daze, her fingers touching her cheek where his lips had been. This was insane. 24 hours ago, she had been crying in her car, feeling like her world was falling apart. Now she was replaying every moment of a coffee date with a billionaire who somehow felt more real than anyone she'd met in years. Mara called the moment Sophie walked through her apartment door. "Well," her friend demanded, "are you alive? Are you in love? Are you being held for ransom?" "I'm alive and not being held for ransom," Sophie said, collapsing on her couch with a smile she couldn't suppress. "And the jury's still out on the other thing." "Oh my God, you like him," Mara said, her voice delighted. "Tell me everything. What's he like? Is he hot? Please tell me he's hot." "He's very hot," Sophie admitted. "Like unfairly hot. And he's also kind and funny and surprisingly vulnerable. Mara, he's a billionaire, an actual billionaire." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Mara said, "I'm sorry, what?" Sophie explained everything, and by the end, Mara was laughing so hard she was crying. "Only you, Soph," she said. "Only you could accidentally trauma dump on a billionaire and have it turn into a romance novel meet cute. This is insane." "I know," Sophie said, "but it feels right somehow." "Is that crazy?" "Probably," Mara said. "But the best things usually are. Just promise me you'll be careful. I know he seems great, but you don't really know him yet." "I promise," Sophie said. "I'm going into this with my eyes open." Xander texted her that evening, just a simple message asking if she got home safely. They ended up texting back and forth for 3 hours, about everything and nothing. He sent her a photo of his office view, the city lights spread out below him. She sent him a picture of her cat, Hemingway, who was currently judging her from his perch on the bookshelf. "Your cat looks like he's planning my demise," Xander texted. He probably is. He's very protective of me. Smart cat. I approve. They fell into an easy rhythm over the next week. Xander was busy with work, dealing with some complicated acquisition, but he made time to text her throughout the day. Good morning messages, random thoughts, pictures of terrible office coffee. Sophie found herself looking forward to every notification, smiling at her phone like a teenager with her first crush. Their second date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant that Xander insisted made the best carbonara in the city. He picked her up himself, driving a surprisingly modest car for a billionaire. What, no limousine? Sophie teased as she got in. I save that for special occasions, Xander said with a grin. Third date minimum. Dinner was even better than coffee had been. They talked about books, music, travel. Xander told her about spending a year in Tokyo after college, teaching English and trying to figure out what he wanted from life. Sophie told him about her dream of opening her own veterinary clinic someday, a place that could offer affordable care to people who couldn't afford expensive treatments for their pets. That's amazing, Xander said, his expression serious. The world needs more people who want to help, not just profit, says the billionaire, Sophie pointed out, but she was smiling. Profit has its place, Xander said, but it shouldn't be the only goal. My father built Pierce Industries on the idea that you can be successful and ethical, that you can make money while also making sure your employees are taken care of, that you're contributing something positive to the communities you build in. That's what I'm trying to continue. Sophie reached across the table and took his hand. You're kind of incredible, you know that. Xander laced his fingers through hers, and Sophie felt electricity at the contact. So are you, he said quietly. You have no idea how much these past few days have meant to me. You make me feel like I can just be myself, not the CEO or the heir or whatever role I'm supposed to play. That's all I want you to be, Sophie said. Just Xander. He drove her home, and this time when he walked her to her door, he didn't just kiss her cheek. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers for permission. Sophie answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, testing, learning. Then Xander's hand slid into her hair and Sophie pressed closer, and gentle became something deeper. Something that made her head spin and her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he said, his voice rough. You should, Sophie agreed, but neither of them moved. Xander laughed softly and stepped back. I'll call you tomorrow. You better, Sophie said. She watched him drive away, then floated into her apartment, her lips still tingling. Hemingway gave her a disapproving look, but she just scratched his ears and ignored his judgment. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments and late-night phone calls. Xander's work was demanding, but he made time for her in ways that felt intentional and meaningful. He sent flowers to her clinic with a note that said, "These won't judge you like Hemingway does." He surprised her with tickets to a concert she'd mentioned wanting to see. He learned her coffee order and showed up at her apartment on her day off with breakfast and that specific smile that made her stomach flip. Sophie introduced him to Mara, who grilled him relentlessly, until even Sophie felt bad for him. But Xander took it all in stride, answering every question with patience and humor until even Mara had to admit he seemed genuine. Okay, I like him, Mara said when Xander went to get them more drinks. He's either the real deal or the best actor I've ever seen. He's the real deal, Sophie said, watching Xander joke with the bartender. I can feel it. 2 months into dating, Xander invited her to a charity gala his company was hosting. Sophie immediately panicked. I don't know if I can do that, she told him over the phone. That's your world, Xander. Important people and fancy dresses and photographers. I'm a veterinary nurse who owns exactly 0 fancy dresses. So we'll get you one, Xander said calmly. And those people aren't important, Sophie. You're important. I want you there because I want you by my side, not because I need a date for appearances. But if you're truly uncomfortable, I understand. Sophie took a deep breath. This was part of his life, and if she wanted to be with him, she needed to be willing to step into it sometimes. Okay, she said. But you're helping me shop for a dress because I have no idea what's appropriate for a billionaire charity gala. Deal, Xander said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Dress shopping with Xander turned into one of Sophie's favorite memories. He sat patiently outside dressing rooms, giving honest opinions on each dress she tried on. When she walked out in a deep emerald green gown that made her red hair look like fire, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. That's the one, he said, his voice a little rough. You sure? Sophie asked, turning to look in the mirror. It's not too much. It's perfect, Xander said, standing up and walking over to her. He rested his hands on her waist, looking at her reflection. You're going to be the most beautiful woman there. Flattery will get you everywhere, Sophie said, but her cheeks were pink. Good to know, Xander murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. The night of the gala, Xander picked her up in an actual limousine, which made Sophie laugh despite her nerves. You promised this was third-date transportation, she said as he helped her in. This is technically our 15th date, Xander pointed out. I'm way overdue. The gala was overwhelming at first. The venue was spectacular, all glittering lights and elegant decorations. People in tuxedos and expensive gowns mingled with champagne glasses, and Sophie recognized several faces from magazines and news articles. But Xander never left her side. He introduced her to everyone as Sophie, my girlfriend, with a warmth and pride that made her feel valued rather than displayed. When she got nervous, he found excuses to step away from the crowd, leading her to quiet corners where they could catch their breath. You're doing great, he murmured during one of these breaks, his hand on the small of her back. Everyone loves you. They're being polite, Sophie said. I just told that woman about the time I had to express a dog's anal glands while she was trying to discuss modern art. Xander burst out laughing, loud enough that people turned to look. You're perfect, he said, kissing her forehead. Don't ever change. Later in the evening, Sophie stepped out onto the balcony for some air. The city stretched out below, beautiful and vast. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear someone approach until a woman's voice said, You must be Sophie. Sophie turned to find an elegant older woman in a silver gown. She had Xander's eyes. You're his mother, Sophie said, immediately nervous. Guilty, the woman said with a warm smile. Xander Pierce, I've been wanting to meet you. Xander talks about you constantly. He does, Sophie asked, surprised. Endlessly, Catherine said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. It's all Sophie said this and Sophie did that. I haven't seen him this happy in years. Thank you for that. Sophie felt her throat tighten. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just being myself. That's exactly what makes it special, Catherine said gently. My son has spent most of his life around people who want something from him. Money, connections, status. You don't want any of that, you just want him. Do you have any idea how rare that is in his world? I'm starting to understand, Sophie admitted. Catherine studied her for a moment, then smiled. I like you, Sophie. You're good for him. And judging by the way he looks at you, I'd say you're going to be in our lives for a long time. I hope so, Sophie said softly. Come find me before you leave, Catherine said, patting her arm. I want to properly get to know the woman who's stolen my son's heart. When Sophie went back inside, Xander immediately found her. My mother cornered you, didn't she? He asked, looking worried. I'm sorry, I tried to warn her to give you space. She's lovely, Sophie said, taking his hand. You look like her, you know, you have her eyes. Xander's expression softened. She likes you too. She just texted me a very unsubtle message about how I better not mess this up. Smart woman, Sophie said. The smartest, Xander agreed. He glanced around, then leaned down to whisper in her ear. Want to get out of here? I've made all the required appearances, and I'd much rather spend the rest of the evening with just you. Absolutely, Sophie said. They snuck out like teenagers ditching prom, and Sophie felt gloriously free as they climbed into the limousine. Where to? The driver asked. Xander looked at Sophie. Your place or mine? Yours, Sophie said. I want to see where you live. Xander's penthouse was stunning, but in a warm, lived-in way that surprised her. She'd been expecting something cold and modern, all glass and chrome. Instead, there were comfortable couches, overflowing bookshelves, and art that looked chosen for love rather than investment value. This is beautiful, Sophie said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. It's so you. I'm glad you think so, Xander said, shrugging off his jacket and loosening his tie. I spend most of my time here, so it needed to feel like home. Can I get you something to drink, wine, water? I think I have hot chocolate somewhere. Hot chocolate sounds perfect, Sophie said, smiling. Very billionaire of you. Mock me all you want, Xander said, heading to the kitchen. But my hot chocolate is legendary. Sophie followed him, watching as he moved around the space with easy familiarity. He wasn't lying. The hot chocolate he made was incredible, rich and dark with a hint of cinnamon. They ended up on his couch, shoes kicked off, talking until the early hours of the morning. At some point, Sophie's head ended up on Xander's shoulder, his arm around her, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I'm falling in love with you, Xander said quietly, his lips against her hair. I know it's fast and maybe I shouldn't say it yet, but I need you to know. You've changed everything for me, Sophie. Everything. Sophie's heart felt too big for her chest. She turned to look up at him, seeing vulnerability and hope and fear all mixed together in his expression. I'm falling in love with you too, she said. It terrifies me because I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be too good to be true. But every day you prove that it's real. Xander kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was a kiss that said everything they'd been feeling, all the emotion they'd been building toward. Sophie's fingers tangled in his hair, and Xander's hand spanned her waist, pulling her closer. Stay, he murmured against her lips. Stay tonight. Okay, Sophie breathed. They moved to his bedroom, and everything that happened after was tender and intense and perfect. Xander was gentle, attentive, making sure she was comfortable and wanted every moment. And Sophie had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Afterward, lying in his arms with the city lights filtering through the windows, Sophie felt a peace she hadn't known she was missing. I could get used to this, she said softly. Good, Xander said, pressing a kiss to her temple, because I'm planning on keeping you around for a very long time. The next morning, Sophie woke up to Xander making breakfast. She put on one of his shirts and padded into the kitchen to find him flipping pancakes with intense concentration. I didn't know billionaires cooked, she teased, wrapping her arms around him from behind. This billionaire does, Xander said, turning to kiss her. I make exactly 3 things well: pancakes, scrambled eggs, and reservations. You're experiencing one of the 3. Lucky me, Sophie said. They ate breakfast on his balcony, the morning sun warm on their faces. Everything felt easy, natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. Over the next 6 months, they built a life together. Sophie met Xander's whole family, including his younger sister Emma, who immediately claimed Sophie as her new favorite person. Xander spent time with Sophie's grandmother, listening to her stories with genuine interest and patience. On the days when the grandmother had confusion or memory lapses, Xander was there, steady and supportive, helping Sophie through the harder moments. He surprised her one day by showing up at her clinic with an offer that made her cry. "I've been thinking about what you said," Xander explained, holding her hands. "About wanting to open your own clinic that offers affordable care. What if we did that together? I provide the funding and business infrastructure, you provide the vision and medical expertise. We could create something that really makes a difference." "Xander, that's too much," Sophie protested, even as her heart soared at the possibility. "It's not too much," he said firmly. "It's an investment in something I believe in. I believe in you, Sophie. I believe in the work you want to do. Let me help make it happen." 6 months later, Riverside Community Veterinary Clinic opened its doors. It was everything Sophie had dreamed of: a bright, welcoming space that offered sliding scale fees and payment plans. The local newspaper did a story on it, and the response was overwhelming. On opening day, Xander showed up with flowers and a huge smile. "Proud of you," he said, kissing her in front of everyone. "This is amazing, Sophie. You're amazing." Sophie was too emotional to speak, so she just hugged him tight and let herself feel the moment. A year after they met, Xander took Sophie back to Riverside Cafe where they'd had their first date. She thought it was just a nostalgic dinner until she noticed his hands were shaking slightly as they sat down. "You okay?" she asked, concerned. "I'm nervous," Xander admitted with a laugh. "Which is ridiculous because I know what your answer is going to be. At least I really hope I know." Sophie's heart started racing. "Xander." He reached across the table and took her hand. "A year ago, you accidentally sent me a voice note that was meant for someone else. You were crying and scared and so beautifully, heartbreakingly human. I called you back because I heard something real in your voice, something genuine in a world that often feels very fake. And when we met here for coffee, I knew my life was never going to be the same." Tears were already streaming down Sophie's face. "You've made me a better person, Sophie," Xander continued, his own eyes bright. "You've shown me what it means to be loved for who I am, not what I have. You've taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be found, cherished, protected." He stood up and moved to kneel beside her chair, pulling out a small velvet box. The entire cafe had gone silent, everyone watching. "Sophie Nolan," Xander said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring with an emerald stone that matched her eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that wrong numbers can lead to the rightest thing in the world?" "Yes," Sophie said through tears and laughter. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The cafe erupted in applause as Xander slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her. Sophie held his face in her hands, overwhelmed by how much could change in a year, how one accidental voice note could lead to everything. They got married 6 months later in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the ocean. Sophie wore a dress that made her look like a princess, and Xander cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. Xander Pierce dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony, and Sophie's grandmother, having a good day, beamed at them both with perfect clarity and joy. "I knew you'd find each other," the grandmother said at the reception, patting Sophie's hand. "Some things are just meant to be." Mara gave a maid of honor speech that had everyone laughing and crying, talking about how Sophie had called her that day convinced she'd just mortified herself in front of a stranger, never knowing that stranger would become the love of her life. "To wrong numbers and right people," Mara toasted, raising her glass. Everyone cheered and drank, and Xander pulled Sophie into his arms. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Incredibly," Sophie said. "You, more than I ever thought possible," Xander said. They honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks eating incredible food, exploring ancient cities, and enjoying being newlyweds. Xander was attentive and romantic, planning little surprises throughout the trip. Sophie felt like she was living in a dream. When they got back, they moved into a house they'd chosen together, something between his penthouse and her small apartment. It had a yard for future pets and kids, plenty of space, but still cozy and warm. Sophie's clinic continued to thrive, and Xander's company took on more socially conscious projects, developing affordable housing and community spaces. They worked together to establish a foundation that supported both animal welfare and Alzheimer's research, honoring both Sophie's passion and the disease that had inadvertently brought them together. 2 years into their marriage, Sophie found out she was pregnant. She told Xander by leaving him a voice note, a deliberate callback to how they met. "Hi, it's me," she said in the recording. "I know you're in a meeting, but I needed to tell you something. Remember how I sent that first voice note to the wrong number, and you called me back because you heard something real? Well, I'm sending this to the right number now, to the man who became my everything. I'm pregnant, Xander. We're having a baby." Xander left his meeting immediately, called her, and said through tears, "I'm coming home. Don't move. I love you so much." Their daughter, Grace Catherine Pierce, was born on a sunny morning in September. She had Xander's dark hair and Sophie's green eyes, and they both fell completely in love the moment they held her. "She's perfect," Xander whispered, cradling Grace with the kind of awestruck gentleness that made Sophie fall in love with him all over again. "We made a person," Sophie said, exhausted but glowing. "A whole perfect person. Best thing I ever did," Xander said, kissing her forehead, "besides calling you back that day." "Besides that," Sophie agreed with a tired smile. Grace grew into a curious, spirited child who had her father wrapped around her tiny finger and her mother's compassion for all living things. By the time she was 2, they'd added a golden retriever named Biscuit to the family, much to Grace's delight and Hemingway's resigned tolerance. Sophie's grandmother passed away peacefully when Grace was 3, on a day when her mind was clear and she was surrounded by family. She held Sophie's hand and told her how proud she was, how happy she was that Sophie had found such love. "That Xander," she said with a knowing smile. "He was worth that wrong number, wasn't he? So worth it," Sophie said, crying and smiling at the same time. Xander held her through the grief, steady and present in the way he'd always been. At the funeral, he gave a eulogy that honored the woman who'd raised the love of his life, talking about how grace and kindness could echo through generations. Time continued to move forward. Grace started school, making friends and bringing home art projects that went on the fridge. Sophie and Xander talked about having another baby, and when Grace was 5, they welcomed a son they named James Alexander Pierce. He had Sophie's red hair and Xander's gray-blue eyes, and he was just as loved as his sister. The community clinic expanded to a second location, and Xander's foundation funded medical research that led to new treatments for Alzheimer's patients. They were making a real difference together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Sophie back to the spot where they'd first met for coffee. The cafe had changed ownership, but the feeling was the same. 10 years, Xander said, holding her hand across the same corner table where they'd sat a decade ago. 10 years since you accidentally sent me that voice note. Best mistake I ever made, Sophie said. I don't think it was a mistake, Xander said seriously. I think it was fate, the universe putting us in each other's path because we were supposed to find each other. You believe in fate now? Sophie asked, teasing gently. That's a change from the logical businessman I met. You changed me, Xander said simply. You made me believe in things I never thought possible. Magic, fate, love that actually lasts. You made me believe in all of it." Sophie leaned across the table and kissed him, this man who'd heard something real in her voice a decade ago and had the courage to call back. This man who'd become her best friend, her partner, her home. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for calling me back that day." "I'll always call you back," Xander promised. "In every life, in every universe, I'd find you and I'd call you back." They went home to their kids, to their full, beautiful, imperfect life. Grace showed them a drawing she'd made of the whole family, including Biscuit and Hemingway, who was now ancient but still judging everyone from his favorite chair. James was working on a puzzle with the focused determination he got from his father. Sophie looked around at her family, at the life she'd built with Xander, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that day in her car, crying and broken, sending that voice note to what she thought was her best friend. She'd been looking for comfort, for someone to tell her everything would be okay. Instead, she'd found everything. That night, after the kids were asleep, Sophie and Xander sat on their back porch watching the stars. Xander's arm was around her shoulders, and Sophie's head rested on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked quietly. "How one moment can change everything," Sophie said. "How pressing send on that voice note led to all of this. Our marriage, our kids, our life. It's incredible when you think about it." "I think about it all the time," Xander admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I just deleted the message, if I hadn't called you back. I can't imagine my life without you in it now." "Good thing you called then," Sophie said. "Best decision I ever made," Xander said, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of knowing each other deeply. Sophie thought about all the moments that had led them here. The first coffee date where she'd been terrified and excited in equal measure. The gala where she'd met his mother. The opening of her clinic. The proposal in that same cafe where they'd first met. Their wedding, their children, every beautiful ordinary day in between. "Hey, Xander," Sophie said softly. "Yeah, if you could go back and change anything, would you?" Xander was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "Not a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to this exact life. Why would I change any of it?" "Not even the early days when I was scared you'd realize I wasn't fancy enough for your world?" Sophie asked. "Especially not those," Xander said firmly. "Those days taught me that you loved me for me, not for what I could give you. That's more valuable than anything, Sophie. You have no idea how rare and precious that is." Sophie turned to look up at him, seeing the sincerity in his face. "I do know," she said, "because I feel the same way about you. You see me, Xander, the real me with all my fears and flaws and emotional voice notes sent to wrong numbers. And you love me anyway." "I love you because of those things, not in spite of them," Xander corrected. "Those things make you who you are, and who you are is the best person I know." They kissed, slow and sweet and full of 10 years of love and trust and partnership. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "Come on," Xander said, standing and pulling her up. "Let's go to bed. We have a busy day tomorrow." "We do?" Sophie asked. "Grace has her soccer game, James has that birthday party, and I promised we'd take Biscuit to the dog park," Xander listed. "So yes, very busy." Sophie laughed. "The glamorous life of a billionaire family." "The best life," Xander corrected. "The only one I want." They went inside, checking on the kids one more time before heading to their own room. Sophie changed into one of Xander's old T-shirts, which had become her preferred sleepwear, and climbed into bed beside him. "Sophie," Xander said in the darkness. Thank you for sending that voice note to the wrong number. Thank you for showing up for coffee even though you were scared." Thank you for giving me a chance. Sophie reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. Thank you for calling me back. Thank you for hearing something real and caring enough to reach out. Thank you for being exactly who you are. We're pretty good together, aren't we? Xander said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The best, Sophie agreed. They fell asleep like that, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. Two people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way and built a love that would last forever. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new adventures and challenges. Grace grew into a thoughtful teenager who wanted to be a veterinarian like her mother. James discovered a love for architecture and spent hours designing imaginary buildings with his father. They got another dog, a rescue named Pepper who had 3 legs and boundless energy. Hemingway finally passed away at the impressive age of 22, and they buried him in the backyard with a small ceremony that had everyone crying. Sophie's clinic grew to 4 locations, providing affordable care to thousands of animals. Xander's foundation funded breakthrough research that helped improve the lives of Alzheimer's patients and their families. They were making the impact they'd always wanted to make together. When they'd been married for 20 years, their kids threw them a surprise anniversary party. Grace and James had coordinated everything, inviting family and friends, even tracking down Mara, who now lived across the country. 20 years, Mara said, hugging Sophie tight. I still can't believe my best friend married a billionaire because of a wrong number voice note. It's like something from a movie. Except it's real, Sophie said, looking across the room to where Xander was laughing with their kids. It's all real. The best love stories usually are, Mara said with a smile. At the end of the night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were asleep, Xander and Sophie found themselves back on their porch, just like that night 10 years ago after their anniversary. 20 years, Sophie said softly. How did that happen? One day at a time, Xander said. One moment, one decision, one choice to love each other even when it was hard. It's never been that hard, Sophie said. Not with you. That's because we're a team, Xander said. We've always been a team from that very first coffee date. You and me against the world. You and me, Sophie agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. Sophie thought about the young woman who'd cried in her car all those years ago, scared and alone and feeling like her world was ending. She wished she could tell that woman that everything would be okay. More than okay. That the voice note she was about to send would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. What are you thinking about? Xander asked, as if reading her mind. How far we've come, Sophie said. How much has changed since that day I accidentally sent you that voice note? Everything and nothing, Xander said thoughtfully. Everything about our circumstances changed, but the core of who we are, what we mean to each other, that's been constant from the start. You knew from the start? Sophie asked curiously. Not consciously, Xander admitted. But some part of me knew that voice note was important, that you were important. Why else would I have called back? I'd never done anything like that before. Fate, Sophie said, echoing his words from years ago. Fate, Xander agreed. Or luck, or the universe looking out for us. Whatever you want to call it, I'm grateful for it every single day. Me too, Sophie said. They went inside eventually, back to their warm house full of memories and love, back to their life that had started with an accident and become everything beautiful. Sophie sometimes still thought about that voice note, about the tears and fear and vulnerability in her voice. She thought about Xander hearing that and choosing to care, choosing to reach out to a stranger in pain. That moment of compassion, that decision to call back, had changed both of their lives forever. It had taught her that sometimes the wrong number could be exactly right, that mistakes could become miracles. That love could come from the most unexpected places and grow into something that sustained and strengthened you through everything life threw your way. She thought about how Xander had heard something real in her voice, something genuine that cut through all the artifice and pretense of his usual world. And she'd seen something real in him too, beneath the billion-dollar empire and the fancy lifestyle. She'd seen a man who cared, who wanted to make a difference, who was lonely in his own way and looking for connection just like she was. They'd found each other, and they'd built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. Not just financially, though Xander's success certainly made things easier, but rich in love, in family, in purpose and meaning. As Sophie lay in bed that night, listening to Xander's steady breathing beside her, she sent up a silent thank you to whatever forces had conspired to put them in each other's path. Thank you for the wrong number. Thank you for the courage to show up for coffee. Thank you for every moment that led us here. She fell asleep smiling, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. The next morning was Sunday, which meant pancakes. It had become a tradition over the years, Xander making his famous pancakes while Sophie made coffee and the kids set the table. Biscuit and Pepper ran around underfoot, hoping for dropped food. "Mom, Dad," Grace said as they all sat down to eat. "I got accepted into the veterinary program at the state university." Sophie dropped her fork. "Grace, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell us you applied?" "I wanted to surprise you," Grace said, beaming. "I want to be like you, Mom. I want to help animals and make a difference." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." "We both are," Xander added, reaching over to squeeze Grace's hand. "You're going to be amazing." James, not to be outdone, announced that he'd been accepted into a summer architecture program. "Dad's been helping me with my portfolio," he said. "I want to design buildings that help people, like the affordable housing projects you do." Xander looked at Sophie, and she could see the emotion in his eyes. Their children had grown into thoughtful, compassionate people who wanted to make the world better. What more could parents ask for? After breakfast, as they cleaned up together, Grace said casually, "You know, I read an article about how you two met, about the wrong number voice note. Everyone at school thinks it's the most romantic story ever." Sophie laughed. "It wasn't particularly romantic at the time. I was crying and scared and completely mortified when I realized what I'd done." "But Dad called you back," James said. "That's the romantic part. He heard you were hurting and he wanted to help, even though he didn't know you." "That's true," Xander said, wrapping his arm around Sophie's waist. "I heard something real and I couldn't ignore it." "That's what we should all do," Grace said seriously. "Pay attention when people need help, even if they're strangers, even if it's inconvenient. You never know what might happen." Sophie felt her heart swell with love for her daughter, for all of them. "That's exactly right," she said. Later that day, Sophie found herself in her home office going through old files on her computer. She came across a folder she'd made years ago, one she'd almost forgotten about. Inside was the original voice note, the one she'd sent to Xander by accident. She hesitated, then played it. Her younger voice filled the room, thick with tears and fear, talking about her grandmother, about feeling alone, about needing someone to tell her it would be okay. It was raw and vulnerable and honest. Sophie understood now why Xander had called her back. There was something in that voice note, something genuine and human that demanded a response. She'd been completely herself in that moment, no filters or pretense, just pure emotion. "I wondered if you'd kept that," Xander said from the doorway. Sophie turned, smiling. "I'd forgotten I had it." "It's strange hearing it now after all these years." Xander crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. That voice note changed my life, he said quietly. Want to know a secret? Always, Sophie said. I saved it too, Xander admitted. I listen to it sometimes when I need to remember what's real and important. It grounds me, reminds me of what actually matters. Sophie turned in his arms to face him. You're incredible, you know that. I'm in love, Xander corrected. Have been since that first coffee date, if I'm being honest. Probably since I heard your voice on that recording. That's impossible, Sophie said. You can't fall in love with someone from a voice note. Apparently I can, Xander said with a grin, because I did. They kissed, and Sophie marveled at how after 20 years his kisses could still make her heart race. How his touch could still make her feel cherished and desired and completely loved. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For what? For calling back. For showing up. For choosing me. Every single day for 20 years. Thank you for sending that voice note, Xander countered. For showing up for coffee even though you were terrified. For giving me the chance to prove that we were meant for this. They stood there, holding each other, grateful for every moment that had led them to this one. As the years continued to pass, Sophie and Xander grew older together, their love deepening and strengthening with time. They watched Grace graduate from veterinary school and open her own clinic. They celebrated when James got his first major architectural contract. They became grandparents, marveling at the tiny humans their children created. Through it all, they remained each other's constants. Each other's safe harbor, best friend, greatest love. On their 30th anniversary, their children organized another surprise party. The whole family was there, including 4 grandchildren who ran around causing cheerful chaos. 30 years, Mara said, hugging Sophie. You two are relationship goals. We've been lucky, Sophie said, watching Xander play with one of the grandchildren. It's not luck, Mara said firmly. It's work and commitment and genuine love. You chose each other every day and that's what made it work. Sophie thought about that later after the party when she and Xander were alone again. You think it's been luck? She asked him. That we've made it this far? Xander considered the question seriously. I think we got lucky in finding each other, he said finally. But everything after that has been choice. Choosing to communicate, choosing to forgive, choosing to put each other first, choosing love even when it would have been easier to walk away. That's not luck, Sophie, that's us. I'd choose you again, Sophie said. Every time in every universe I'd choose you. Same, Xander said simply. Always. They were in their 60s now, hair graying, bodies not quite as spry as they used to be. But when Xander looked at Sophie, he still saw the beautiful woman who'd walked into that cafe 30 years ago, nervous and hopeful and real. And when Sophie looked at Xander, she still saw the man who'd heard her pain and chose to care, who'd built a life with her that was fuller and richer than she'd ever dreamed possible. Their love story, which had started with an accidental voice note, had become the foundation for an entire family. Grace and James both credited their parents' relationship with showing them what real love looked like. The grandchildren were growing up in a family built on compassion, communication, and commitment. Sophie's original clinic had expanded to 12 locations, providing affordable care to thousands of animals. Xander's foundation had funded research that led to significant breakthroughs in Alzheimer's treatment. Together, they'd created scholarships, supported community programs, and made a tangible difference in countless lives. But more than any professional achievement, they were most proud of their family. Of the children they'd raised to be kind and thoughtful. Of the grandchildren who were already showing signs of that same compassion. We did good, Xander said one evening, watching their family gathered around the dinner table. We did, Sophie agreed, taking his hand. We really did. As they grew older still, they made sure to tell their story to anyone who would listen. Not because it was special or unique, but because it was real. Because it showed that love could come from unexpected places, that one moment of vulnerability could change everything, that choosing each other every single day was what made a relationship last. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they went back one final time to where it all started. The cafe was under new ownership again, but they sat at that same corner table, holding hands across it just like they had on their first date. 50 years, Sophie said, her voice soft with wonder. Half a century, Xander. Best 50 years of my life, Xander said. Every single day with you has been a gift, Sophie. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, because those are the ones that proved we were strong enough for this. I love you, Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Xander said. Thank you for sending that voice note to the wrong number. Thank you for being brave enough to meet me for coffee. Thank you for this life. They kissed, and it was just as sweet and meaningful as their first kiss had been 50 years ago. Sophie thought about that scared young woman in the car, sending a desperate voice note to who she thought was her best friend. She thought about how that one moment of vulnerability had opened the door to everything beautiful in her life. Her marriage, her children, her grandchildren, her career, her purpose. All of it had started with a wrong number and a man compassionate enough to call back. As they left the cafe for the last time, walking slowly, hand in hand, Sophie sent up a final prayer of gratitude. For the wrong number that was so right. For the voice note that changed everything. For the man who heard something real and had the courage to respond. For love that lasted 50 years and would last forever. For coming home to each other every single day, no matter what. For this life, this beautiful, imperfect, completely perfect life they'd built together, one day, one choice, one moment of love at a time.